Hi, I am Anna. I come from www.ntvforex.com. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Analysis http ntvforex.com News ID B1429A9 2020 21:51:21 p.m. After disparaging the French Revolution at the Paris G7 summit in 1989, Margaret Thatcher left a copy of Dickens's Tale of Two Cities for the French socialist President Mitterrand. NBSP The story, as it will be recalled, contrasts the revolutionary chaos of Paris in 1789 to the peaceful London. NBSP The French Revolution was also the subject of the seeming misunderstanding of Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, who, when asked in 1972 about the political implication, said it was too soon to tell. NBSP The apocryphal account is now widely recognized as a misunderstanding, and that Zhou's comment referred to the French student protests of 1968. NBSP In any event, the opening sentence of the book captures the spirit of the capital markets as Q3 is winding down. NBSP The second quarter was horrific, it appears, for nearly everyone but China. NBSP Economies bounced back sharply in Q3, and the issue that the high-frequency data will shed light on is just how strong of a recovery. NBSP The MSCI Free Float Weighted World Equity Index includes developed and emerging markets made a new record high in early September before the current correction. NBSP Economic reports from most of the major economies show the pace of the recovery has slowed. NBSP In the same way, the recovery began before the end of the NBSP Q2. The loss of economic momentum was seen as early as July in some series and August in others. NBSP The deceleration is catching economists by surprise. NBSP That was the takeaway from the August U.S. industrial production and retail sales reports last week. NBSP Industrial output rose by 0.4%, which was less than half of the median forecast Bloomberg survey. NBSP Retail sales rose 0.6% in August, not the 1% economists forecast, and, to add insult to injury, July's shopping spree was revised to 0.9% from 1.2%. NBSP The main economic report for the major industrial countries next week is the preliminary PMI surveys for September. NBSP The US and UK composite made new highs in August, but Japan has gone nowhere since recovering to 45.0 in June, and the Eurozone peaked in July and slipped in August. NBSP and the sentiment indicators seem to be running ahead of the hard data. At the same time, price pressures in most countries remain too low for policymakers' comfort. NBSP oil prices are off a third despite the dramatic recovery from April, when negative prices in the futures market were seen. NBSP The disruption spurred by the pandemic and the policy response has distorted prices and shifting consumption patterns. NBSP cuts in the sales tax value-added tax, e.g., Germany, different seasonal promotional sales schedules, and lower housing costs, rents and owner-occupied costs weigh on core measures. NBSP Just like some scoff at annualized quarterly GDP figures, projecting the low inflation figures far into the future also does not seem right. The role of the euro in the region's inflation has become a talking point in recent weeks. NBSP The argument is that the euro's rise will dampen EMU inflation. NBSP It seems reasonable, but there are two considerations that caution against exaggerating. NBSP First, the euro's rise against the dollar is modest. NBSP It is not fair to measure it from its extremes. NBSP The euro was flat in the first half of the year. NBSP It rallied in July by the most in a decade, but since the end of July, with some exceptions around the Fed's announcement of an average inflation target, the euro has been mostly chopping sideways between $1.17 and $1.19. NBSP Second, many other factors influence Eurozone inflation than the bilateral exchange rate, which the ECB says in monitors but does not target. NBSP consider that in 2015 and 2016, when the euro average of a monthly close was around $1.1030, headline CPI was 0.2% 12-month average. NBSP in 2017, the euro averaged almost $1.14, and CPI averaged 1.5%. NBSP in 2018, the euro a little below $1.1780, while the CPI averaged 1.8%. NBSP last year the euro averaged almost $1.12. NBSP CPI averaged 1.2%. NBSP for the sake of the argument, imagine the euro averages $1.20 in the last 4 months of 2020, then the average this year would be a little above $1.15. NBSP through August, EMU CPI has averaged 0.5%. Of course, there are variable and unpredictable lags and leads, but monetary union means that Europe has transformed from a group of mostly small open economies to a large, less open economy. NBSP surely, the 35% decline in oil prices, year to date, has deflationary implications, including core services, like transportation. NBSP there is still more than 6 months before the March and April oil shock drops from year-over-year measures. It seems perfectly reasonable for the exchange rate to be an input into models that measure financial conditions and estimate inflation. NBSP however, the ECB's ability to forecast inflation is rather weak, as this chart from the Institute of International Finance illustrates. NBSP this is most certainly not meant to throw shade at the ECB's economic staff. Instead, it is about the ability to forecast inflation in general. NBSP the chart shows that over the period in which the euro has been weak it has been below the OECD's measure of purchasing power parity since mid-2014. The ECB has consistently anticipated greater inflation than materialized, even if adjusted for lags. Inflation and interest rates have been trending lower for around 40 years. NBSP all the things that economists have said would cause inflation, like the dramatic expansion of central bank balance sheets, negative interest rates, extending promises of low interest rates for longer, etc., have lifted prices, and this was before the pandemic. NBSP it is difficult to imagine that more of the same, on top of the economic disruption of COVID is going to materially change the outcome. St. Louis Fed President Bullard explained that there are understandable relationships between macroeconomic variables in a specific paradigm and when the paradigm shifts the relationships change. NBSP the major central banks have met in recent weeks, and all seem to promise more actions if needed. NBSP investors are concluding more support will be provided. NBSP a COVID vaccine is a wild card, especially if President Trump is right, and a vaccine will be available before the November election. NBSP however, assuming that other health officials are correct and a credible vaccine will take at least 6-9 months longer, more monetary support is likely. Of the major central banks, the Bank of England may be the first to move and possibly at its next meeting in November. NBSP it is unlikely to be ready for negative interest rates, but zero interest rates and or more gilt purchases seem reasonable. The ECB is expected to extend its pandemic emergency purchase program at the December meeting and extend it until the end of next year. NBSP the market appears to be pricing in a 10 BP rate cut, and partly as a result, 3-month Euribor traded below the ECB's deposit rate 0.5% for the first time last week. NBSP the EU will continue to recognize fiscal flexibility in 2021, and budget deficits throughout the region are likely to remain elevated. The Bank of Japan revised up its economic assessment at last week's meeting. NBSP yet, Japan's core measure of inflation, which excludes fresh food but includes energy, fell to 0.4% year-over-year in August. Tourism promotion, including discounts, are estimated to shave CPI measures by 0.3%-0.4%. NBSP similarly, in Europe, disinflation, for sure, deflation probably not. NBSP Japan's new Prime Minister enjoys a bump of popular support. NBSP if Suga seeks his own mandate by insisting on elections, he will also likely push for another supplemental budget. NBSP the BOJ may want to accommodate the new Prime Minister. The Federal Reserve's average inflation regime is just dressed up forward guidance. NBSP. The Fed's own projections indicate that it does not expect to reach its goals for at least 3 years. NBSP. Simply because the Fed is independent does not mean that it is not a valid question whether that is acceptable. NBSP, who determined that a 3-year wait is a reasonable price for not taking new measures. NBSP. The U.S. economy may be one poor jobs report from intensifying pressure on the Fed to act. NBSP. One way or the other, the political paralysis in Washington that is preventing additional stimulus will change come November. NBSP. A majority of both Republicans and Democrats favor additional support. NBSP. It is a question of when and how much. Subscribe our channel to receive the news as soon as possible. Thank you for watching. If you want to read real-time news, text messages to MT5 Expert Advisors page at https://m.me/mt5.expert.advisors.